In today's video, I'm going to choose colors for a limited palette and fill up my new tiny watercolor palette. I recently received this new design for a tiny palette by GoDraw, who are my favorite company that makes little tiny palettes. And because I get a lot of questions all the time from people asking, how do you choose colors for a limited palette? I thought this would be a good opportunity to walk you through the process of how I choose colors. And in addition to that, I'll also show you some of the other limited palettes that I have and the colors that I've put into those. So I'll be sharing with you a variety of different manufacturers and how I choose colors from each of them. And also giving you some tips of things to consider when you're creating your own limited palettes. And if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how to win one of these palettes and the sketchbooks that go with them. So with that said, let's get into it. This is the new tiny palette. It is so lovely. I saw this one on Instagram and didn't have it, so I reached out to GoDraw and they were kind enough to send it to me. It measures at 4 centimeters square. And the depth is about 1.8 centimeters. And here it is in comparison to the one that I normally use. The depth is the same, but it's a little bit shorter and a little bit fatter because instead of being a rectangular shape, it's a square shape. And then on the inside, there's more mixing space on this newer palette, and it also opens up to be a little bit bigger. In terms of fitting into one of these smaller 2-inch by 2-inch or 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters sketchbooks, this one fits perfectly, and this newer one would hang over the sides a little bit. However, I like to use this sketchbook a lot as well, and I've normally been using a more extended palette, but I thought this is a perfect fit for this sketchbook when I'm painting. So I'm really excited to fill it up. And I think it will encourage me to use this sketchbook a lot more frequently, which I really want to do. Currently, I've been using this palette, which is a little bit bigger. It measures about 5 centimeters by 4 centimeters, but it accommodates more colors, and you can see them side by side here. So I've been using this one when I paint in this sketchbook, but I quite like the idea of having just a more simple, limited palette and also being able to use the A.Gallo paints. The paints that I have in this one are the Winsor Newton Professional. I also personally prefer the darker wood. I find that it's a less brittle wood and it can take a little more wear and tear. These lighter woods tend to stain a little bit more and get more brittle, and they just require a lot more maintenance. You can see that mine is just looking a bit stained and grubby and needs a little bit of an update, which I'll do someday soon. This is the current tiny palette that I've been using for about 3 years now. I've done several different sketchbooks with it, and I'm so familiar with it and love it so much. And the way that I approached this was not with a huge amount of thought, to be honest. I had this set of Daniel Smith colors. It's their Essentials set. And in here, it has a very nice limited palette already curated for you. So it has a cool and a warm yellow, a cool and a warm red, and a cool and a warm blue. So that alone is going to enable you to mix basically any color that you would want. And the way I've laid it out in the palette is all of my cool colors are on the left side and all of my warm colors are on the right side in terms of the primaries. And then on the bottom, I have an earthy yellow and an earthy red. And for that, I used transparent yellow oxide and transparent red oxide. I'm particularly fond of the transparent red oxide. It's made with Pigment Red 101 and will give you similar mixes to what you would get with a burnt sienna. But I love the transparency and the vibrancy that you get with the transparent red oxide. So I'm really familiar with all of the colors in this palette. And I've had so many questions from people over the years asking what colors I recommend for a limited palette. And that's what it would be, a limited palette of a cool and a warm for each of the primary colors. And then if you have extra spaces, I would add either some extra blues or convenience colors that you like, or I like to add earth colors. And again, I always like to have a transparent red oxide or a burnt sienna. In fact, I would sacrifice one of my other colors just to have a transparent red oxide. I also really like to use Winsor & Newton professional watercolors. And so when I got this little tiny pochade box, I filled it up with the Winsor & Newton, and I've made several little paintings with this set as well. And I did a similar configuration here where I have all of the cool primaries on the left and all of the warm ones next to those. And then I have a selection of different earth colors. This is a more extended limited palette. So I do have my burnt sienna, and then for another earth color, I would probably choose just the raw sienna, but I put a few others just to experiment and play around. So you can see those colors here. I have raw umber, light red, and burnt umber, raw sienna, permanent rose, and burnt sienna. But the main primaries, again, if I was going to create a limited palette with just 6, would be these 6 colors. So for the cool colors, it's bismuth yellow, permanent alizarin crimson, and Winsor blue, which is Winsor & Newton's phthalo blue green shade. And then for the warm colors, I have Winsor yellow, Winsor red, and French ultramarine. I really want to make a limited tiny palette using my A.Gallo paints, and it's been a bit of a journey to find the perfect ones. So I'll share that experience with you a little bit. I had purchased this set of the Naturale tubed paints, and I also bought these extra ones. And I really like the selection of colors in here, but most of them I like more for a more extended palette. For a limited palette, I'm looking more for the traditional warm and cool of each of the primaries, plus a few of the earth colors. So I had additionally purchased these colors, which I thought were going to be perfect. And in fact, they almost are. I put them in these 2 smaller palettes. One is a pocket palette by Art Toolkit, and the other is a similar one made by Nomadic Artist. I don't even know if this one is still available anymore, but I put all of the Naturale tubed paints in one of them and a few other earth colors to make up the difference. And then I put the extra colors that I had purchased in this other watercolor tin. And I'll show you some of my experimentations with that because I was really surprised by the results. They weren't exactly what I thought they would be. I started with this impromptu little color chart where I have the different yellows and reds and different browns and even this Naturno, which is a purpley color, on the left-hand side. And then over on the top, I did a mixture of all of my blues as well as my green earth and my black to get an idea for the types of mixes that I could get. And because my idea was to choose 2 different yellows, I didn't feel that these offered enough versatility. They seemed very similar in many aspects. So again, I ordered a few extra colors, a warmer yellow and some other reds to see if I could find something that had a little bit more diversity in terms of mixing. And again, I put my 4 blues that I really liked the most on the top, and then just played around with a range of different mixes using all of these new colors that I purchased. And then I narrowed it down from there to the royal yellow and the arancione and the sartorio red. And at that point, I was liking the raw sienna and the burnt umber dark. And so I did a little color chart just to experiment with those colors. I really liked the mixes that I was getting with this Perylene maroon. However, when I actually came to swatching everything out, I felt that it was maybe a little bit too similar to the permanent carmine. And I also was feeling that the mixes that I was getting with the raw sienna Badia didn't excite me as much as I thought they would. So I decided to eliminate the raw sienna and the Perylene maroon. And I did another color chart here where I had the royal yellow and the arancione. And then for my reds, I had the permanent carmine. And I decided to move my sartorio red, which would normally be my earthy red color, and use that for my warm red. And then again, I had the ultramarine dark and the transparent cerulean, and then the gold ochre and the green umber for my other earth colors. And this color chart turned out to be really beautiful. In fact, this one was my daughter's favorite. But when I looked out the window and when I drive around the area where I live, I'm really seeing much more of an array of different dark colors. and different greens, and I'm not seeing as many of these orangey colors. And so I felt that this one might not be the best. I did a lot of different swatching of the different colors to get to the decision of which ones I wanted to use. I did lots of wet into wet, as well as making little color wheels to try to see the different variety that I could get with that. This one felt very close, but again, it just didn't feel like there was enough variety in the darker greens or in the array of different light browns and dark browns that I see in the landscape around me. And although all of these colors are beautiful, they just didn't feel like they were giving me the option to get the deeper greens as well as the deeper grays and browns that I really strive for when I'm painting. So I went back to some of these early mixes and was thinking about eliminating a few of the colors in order to be able to introduce this Indanthrone blue, which seems to be just a bit grittier and earthier than the ultramarine dark. I love the ultramarine dark, but some of the mixes tend to go a little bit more gray and a little bit less green. And I didn't want to sacrifice those colors necessarily, but I did think it would be nice to have another option and to experiment with a different blue. So again, I did an array of different color wheels. This top row are mixes all using ultramarine. The middle one is Indanthrone, and then the bottom one is Cerulean. And I felt that especially in some of these greener and grayer areas, the variety was different enough between the ultramarine and the Indanthrone to want to include it, which is something I normally don't do in a limited palette. One thing to note is that this royal yellow that A.Gallo makes is similar to a cadmium yellow medium, but without the toxicity. And so that is a perfect mixing color. And I thought between that, the transparent cerulean blue, and the permanent carmine, I'm able to get enough of a variety of those secondary colors that are more classic. And so for my second set of primaries, I could experiment more with having an earthy triad. So in the spirit of wanting to add another blue, I decided to sacrifice this Arancione and instead move the gold ochre up next to the royal yellow and keep the Sartoria where it was, and keep the green umber because look at those beautiful mixes, and instead to introduce that Indanthrone blue. So I made another color chart here that you can see, and although it doesn't have all of the bright lightness that you get from including that orangey yellow, it does give me more of a variety of the colors that I actually see in the landscape around me, and there still are enough light colors to be able to get those lighter, brighter mixes. And I don't think the differentiation between the ultramarine dark and the Indanthrone blue show up as vividly on this camera. And I still was a little bit uncertain because this is definitely an experimental palette for me in terms of a limited palette. So I decided to do more of a deep dive into color mixing with these three colors. And I made a video for this over on my Patreon. If you're interested in seeing that, you can head over there. Essentially, I took the three blues, the transparent cerulean, the ultramarine dark, and the Indanthrone blue, and I did a range of mixing them with the other colors in the palette, but also mixing them with a third color. And then on the bottom, doing different wet into wet mixes with all of the colors in the palette. And I am loving the variety I get. I can really get a big array of those darker colors that I see, but I'm still also able to get a lot of the very pale light colors and lighter greens as well. And also the orangey gold colors that are everywhere, especially in the spring and the autumn, you see those colors a lot. So this is the final palette that I've decided on, and I'll show you how that looks, and we can fill up the tiny palette together. So here is the final collection of the paints that I'm planning to use. The gold ochre and the green umber are both from the Naturelle set, and the other tubes are ones that I purchased separately. And you know what? This is a tiny palette. If I decide that I don't like this configuration, it's not really going to be a big deal to swap out different colors over time. So I'm using royal yellow, gold ochre, permanent carmine, sartorio red, transparent cerulean, ultramarine blue dark, Indanthrone blue, and green umber. And as I'm filling up the palette, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things that I like in particular about each of the different colors. The first thing that I have to think about really are how I want to place these colors. In my previous palette, it was easy because there were spaces for 4 colors on the left and 4 colors on the right, and it made it very easy to differentiate the warm from the cool. And when I'm painting, I like things to be really fluid and natural. Even though the palette opens up this way, I'm going to mostly be using it in this sketchbook. And so as I paint, I'll be looking at the colors this way because I like the idea of being able to paint in this direction and do a nice long portrait styled landscape. Even though sometimes I may decide to orient things as a landscape, I will predominantly be looking at the palette and my sketchbook this way. So I think I'm going to put my main primaries in this first row, and then my earthy primaries in the middle row, and then my extra blue and my green umber in these 2 spots. Setting up a palette is such a personal thing, and because I can't easily move these colors without having to either use them all up and then move them or take them out, I want to try to get it right the first time. I also like the idea of having my lightest colors on the top so that any of the other colors don't bleed into them, and it's also closer to the mixing well. So my 3 primary colors are going to be these 3. The Royal Yellow, Permanent Carmine, and Transparent Cerulean. And then my earthy choices are the Gold Ochre, Sartorio Red, and Ultramarine Blue Dark. And then I have the Indanthrone Blue and the Green Umber. I like to use little toothpicks for stirring the paint when I fill a palette. And I also have a little pot of water and some cotton buds in case I need to clean up any areas. It's always really scary the first time you add a new color to a palette, but we're going to start with the Royal Yellow. The Royal Yellow is made with Pigment Yellow 154, and it's their closest facsimile to what you might get from a cadmium yellow medium, but without all of the toxicity. I've tried other cadmium yellow replacements from other brands, and I have to say that I think this one is actually the closest one to the mark. Many of the other ones lean a little bit too much towards being a buttery color, which is beautiful, but if you want to mix some of the pale greens that are a little bit cooler, it can be tricky to do with other cadmium substitutes. The thing that I really like about this one is that not only can I get results that will give me some nice warm greens, but I can also achieve a lot of cooler greens from a paler, lighter cooler green to a darker, deeper, richer green, depending on which blue I'm mixing it with. And also if I mix it with the Permanent Carmine, I can get some beautiful oranges. And if I mix it with the gold or the red, I can get some more earthy oranges. To fill these tiny palettes, I just squeeze a little dollop into the painting well, and then I use the toothpick to spread it around and stir it up so that it can settle more evenly into the whole space and not have any air bubbles or any sinkholes once it's dried. Next up is the Gold Ochre, which is made with Pigment Yellow 43. Some companies use Pigment Yellow 43 in their yellow ochres. This, however, is a little bit different than a yellow ochre because it's a bit more transparent and it almost has a shimmery, thin look to it, which I think is great because it really mimics the color that you can see on bare tree trunks. And I love the fresh, vibrant look that it gives a landscape. I can mix it with the Royal Yellow to make that Royal Yellow a little bit more buttery. I can also get some cooler oranges by mixing it with the Permanent Carmine, and then a variety of different greens, from cooler ones to warmer ones, depending on which blue I'm mixing it with. I'm very excited to explore this color because it's completely different than one that I would normally use in a limited palette. For my cooler red, I'm using Permanent Carmine, which is made with Pigment Violet 19. And in case I hadn't mentioned already, all of the colors that I have chosen are single pigment colors, which means that when I mix them with one another, they're going to have a fresher, cleaner, and also more predictable result, which is something that I really look for when I'm painting on location. I can get an array of different beautiful violets and purples, but more importantly, I can get some gorgeous browns and even grays by mixing it with the other colors as well. If I mix it with any of the blues and a little bit of the gold ochre, I can get some of those really deep, beautiful, earthy browns and grays that you see in nature. And if I mix it with any of the mixes with the blues and the royal yellow, I can deepen some of those existing greens. I don't normally use my cooler red as much as I should, and I'm planning to push the gamut on that with this palette and really expand my own mixing repertoire. Next up is the Sartorio Red, which is made with Pigment Red 102. And this, again, is a very experimental thing for me because normally I would use a more traditional, brighter red. But the one that they had available in the tube is Scarlet Red, and it just felt like the mixes were slightly too similar to the Permanent Carmine. So in the spirit of having a more natural primary set, this is going to be the red for my primary set. I am accustomed to using Pigment Red 101 either in the form of transparent red oxide, which I love, 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 or the burnt sienna. I really like the mixes that I get with this color, so I think it's going to be a good accompaniment to the others in this palette. And I can especially get an array of different beautiful greens and even grays by mixing this with other blues and yellows. So again, this is a newer pigment for me and a newer color, and it's going to be an adventure to mix with this one. My cool blue is the transparent cerulean. It's made with Pigment Blue 15-3, which is the same pigment basically as phthalo blue. And I'm thinking of it mentally as just being a phthalo blue because the mixes that I get with it are very similar to what I would get with using that color in any brand, really. If I mix it with the royal yellow, I can get some beautiful pale greens. If I use more water, I can even make those greens look extremely cool. And if I mix it with the gold, I'm going to get colors that are a little bit more khaki, or even the green that you might see on a pine tree. To be honest, I probably won't mix it with the gold as often as I will the royal yellow. Unless, of course, I'm going to add a bit of the Sartorio Red or the Permanent Carmine to make, again, some of those deeper browns or even purpley browns or grays in nature. I'm putting the Ultramarine Blue Dark with my earthy primaries, even though it could be used with the regular primaries as well. It's made with Pigment Blue 29, and it's a beautiful, vibrant color. It reminds me a little bit more of a cobalt. And when I mix it with a royal yellow, I get an array of pretty much any green that I'm looking for. It can even look quite cool. When I mix it with the gold, however, the mixes tend to be a little bit more on the gray side. And that's the reason why I've added the other blue, which you'll see in a minute. Normally, I would use a French ultramarine with a transparent red oxide to get an array of different browns and deep colors. But neither this color nor the Sartorio Red give me that same exact array of mixes. And for that reason, I've added the next two colors. This one is the Green Umber. It's made with Pigment Brown 8. I normally steer away from pigment browns because I just feel like they muddy up the colors a little bit too much. This one, however, doesn't. It feels really fresh, and it's really more like a raw umber than a burnt umber. In fact, they call it the Italian raw umber. I really love this color. In fact, I've been exploring more with raw umbers in general in my palette because it provides a lot of nice cool mixes, which can be a little bit tricky to get when you're painting outside. And if I mix it with any of the three blues, I get an array of different deep green colors. Any of those mixes that I get look so natural and organic and exactly what I see in nature. So I'm really excited about this one. And my final color and my third blue is the Indanthrone Blue. It's made with Pigment Blue 60. And I chose to add a third blue instead of an additional earthy color or a warmer primary red because it just gives me a lot of what I'm looking for when I paint outside. In fact, if I mix this color with either the Sartorio Red or the Green Umber, I'm going to get some gorgeous grays, and I can get very deep mixes just with these two colors. I mean, obviously you can add 3 colors or even 4 to deepen and darken your mixes, but I like to be able to have a few colors in a palette that are going to give me some dark mixes just with 2 different pigments. I feel like it just adds more of a transparent look to watercolors. And since I'm going to be using this to paint tiny paintings, maintaining a sense of transparency in my mixes is important to me. And where the ultramarine dark and green umber and even gold gave me some of the cooler greens or even browns or khakis, The Indanthrone Blue is giving me deep green mixes with both of those colors, so I'm super excited about it. And again, with this whole palette, I'm just excited to be exploring a different type of a limited palette to the one that I'm so accustomed to using. So it's going to be a grand adventure. Let me know in the comments if you've used any of the earth colors to create a yellow, red, blue set and which ones they were, because I always am looking for new ideas and I'd love to hear what works for you. And here is the whole collection together. They may sink a little bit over the next couple days, and if that happens, I'll just add a tiny bit to each little painting well. And then it just snaps together with the magnets. And once it's dry, I can use it with this sketchbook and just clip it on the side right here, and it will be really exciting to use. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to take this out and do a little tiny painting adventure with it. If you've seen any of my videos before, you probably know what a big fan I am of the GoDraw palettes and their sketchbooks. These palettes were invented by them, and in my opinion, they are the best that you can get. I get questions all of the time from people asking me where to buy them and how to buy them. And if you're interested in that, you can head over to their Instagram and they have a link to their worldwide shop. But they reached out to me and asked if I wanted to collaborate on a giveaway. And I jumped at the idea because I know how many of you love these products and would love to own and paint with them. So we're giving away 3 different sets. 2 sets will include the original 8-well palette, just like this one, and it fits perfectly on one of the corresponding sketchbooks. And they do come with these bulldog clips, but as you may know, I really like to use these other plastic clips that you can get at any grocery store. And this palette will come with 2 of the sketchbooks. GoDraw partners with a company called Inkberry, who makes their lovely handmade little sketchbooks. They have an elastic strap that holds the sketchbook together when you're not painting and protects the pages. The cover is a lovely surface and size to hold in your hand, and it feels like the most precious little package. The paper is a cold-pressed cotton blend of sewn signatures and can withstand multiple layers of water or ink. I have really put mine to the test over the past few years. It's perfect for pencil or ink drawing, watercolor, gouache, or any wet medium. I feel like my completed sketchbooks are one of the greatest heirlooms I'll pass on to my children. So we'll be giving away 2 of these sets. And in addition, we'll be giving away one of these palettes like the one that we just filled together. And this one will come with 2 of the larger 5 by 8 centimeter sketchbooks. And like I showed earlier, this palette fits perfectly on this sketchbook. We'll be giving away 2 of this set and 1 of this set. And if you head on over to my Instagram, which is linked in the description, I will have a post with all of the details and the information about how to enter. Let me know in the comments which palette you liked the best and also what sorts of colors you put in your own limited palettes. Thanks so much for being here. I hope that you all have a beautiful day with many happy painting adventures of your own.